should never have put me with that woman.
And now I'm absolutely ashamed of saying I'm Labour.
Whose idea was that? Everything. She's just a sort of bigoted woman.
You're joking.
There is something wonderfully delicious about hearing the real thoughts of a politician.
The 28th of April 2010, that's a day that will forever live in infamy for the Labour Party, particularly former Prime Minister Gordon Brown. That's because it was the day the leader of the country called one of his own voters a bigot. That day began as many days on the campaign trail do. Gordon Brown travelled up to Rochdale to campaign with the Labour candidate in what was looking like a marginal contest with the Lib Dems.
And the Lib Dems were on the rise slightly during the campaign because Nick Clegg had a very good debate, two debates. So Labour thought it was important that they'd put some effort into these marginals. Equally, Gordon Brown was thought of as someone that they wanted to put out there a bit more to see that he had a bit of humanity. He'd had this reputation as being a bit of a kind of stern character, very good on the figures and numbers, but not very approachable. So they thought, well, we'll put him into a setting in Rochdale in a marginal seat and see how he does.
And so the day begins. Now you might have a vague picture in your mind of what actually happens on a political walkabout. The candidate and the Prime Minister knock on a couple of doors, chat to some constituents before heading on their way. Well, they're actually much more coordinated.
None of these walkabouts are quite what they seem. They're fairly manufactured events. And so Labour are keen not just to allow him to wander freely amongst people in Rochdale, they wanted to set up the people he'd likely to encounter.
Enter stage right, Gillian Duffy. She was a Rochdale local and a lifelong Labour supporter who the Prime Minister's team must have thought was the perfect candidate for one of these chance meetings. But little did they know this was actually the second mistake they had made that day. The first came earlier that morning.
So what would normally happen in those circumstances on a walkabout is that the broadcasters would have their microphones on a stick, and they would kind of dangle it in front of the Prime Minister and whoever he was talking to, and that would be the way that you capture the audio of the walkabouts. But on this occasion, this was so choreographed that Labour asked Sky News, who were what was called the pool for this particular event. That means that Sky News were covering this event for all the broadcasters. Labour asked Sky News if the Prime Minister, rather than having a stick mic dangling above him while he was talking to people, could have a lapel mic, a radio lapel mic, which would catch all the audio as he was wandering around.
At this moment, Labour probably didn't know that they had accidentally set themselves up for one of the worst campaigning mistakes of all time. But it quickly began to play out in front of them.
Gillian Duffy was a grandmother in Rochdale, lifelong Labour supporter, who had concerns about immigration, and so given the Prime Minister was there, she used the opportunity to ask him about immigration. He didn't like it.
My family have voted Labour all their life.
Yes.
My father, even when he was in his teens, went to Free Trade Hall to sing the red flag.
Yes.
And now I'm absolutely ashamed of saying I'm Labour.
No, you mustn't be, because what we've done, we've improved the health service, we're financing more police, neighbourhood policing, we're getting better schools, and we're coming through a very, very difficult world recession. You know what my views are. I'm for fairness, for hard-working families. I want to make sure, I've told these guys across there, look, if you commit a crime, you're going to be punished, and you better stop.
Well,
you better stop.
I don't think it's happening in Rochdale.
Under the watchful eye of the UK's media, the conversation had started pretty poorly. But Gordon Brown is largely able to talk Gillian Duffy back in his favour until she raises an issue that becomes slightly more uncomfortable for him.
There is no life on the dole for people anymore. If you're unemployed, you've got to go back to work.
It's
6 months.
You can't say anything about the immigrants because you're saying that but all these Eastern Europeans what are coming in, where are they flocking from?
A million people come from Europe, but a million people, British people, have gone into Europe. You do know there's a lot of British people staying in Europe as well.
And it's a very, very brief element in it, where there's this bit of tension, if you like, between the two of them. And in the end, they appear to part on fairly good terms.
You've had the chance.
I hope you keep it up.
It's been very good to meet you. It's been very good to meet you.
Yeah.
And you're wearing the right colour today.
And then Gordon Brown walks off and gets in his car. As far as he's concerned, the interview with Gillian has been damaging, and he's not happy. You can imagine he'd be feeling glad it was over and ready to move on. But he and his team have forgotten something crucial.
Now, it's not being broadcast live. We've come off the live shot at that time, but the audio is still coming in. And at Sky News, the producer who was dealing with it, a woman called Tammy Hoffman, had her headphones clamped to her head. And she heard, as the car was driving away, Gordon Brown muttering about how unhappy he was with the interviews.
It's a disaster. Well, just... Okay. Should never have put me with that woman. Whose idea was that?
I don't know, I didn't see her.
It's Sue, I think. It's just ridiculous.
I'm not sure they'll go with that one.
They will go with it.
And then the Prime Minister uttered the words that would make a bad interview with a constituent into a disaster.
What did she say?
Oh, everything. She's just a sort of bigoted woman that said she used to be Labour. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Back at Sky News headquarters, there's growing excitement about what they've just heard.
So Tammy comes to see Jonathan Levy, the head of news gathering at the time, and myself, and says, look, this is what happened. And I have to say, we were absolutely astonished. Astonished not only because the Prime Minister said something like that, but astonished and excited because here, right on our lap, was one of the great political exclusives of the era. There is something wonderfully delicious about hearing the real thoughts of a politician after they've encountered a member of the public, rather than having this sort of sanitized version that we always get.
The next thing that happened was Gordon realised that he still had the mic, snatched it off his lapel, threw it out the car window, which prompted the presenter at Sky News, Kay Burley, who can be quite cheeky, to say, Prime Minister, can we have our mic back, please?
But there's still one problem. Gordon Brown obviously didn't know that he was being recorded, and so the journalists are faced with an ethical decision. Do they put the audio out on air?
Now, I have to say, I've had many sort of awkward decisions about compliance and ethics and legal issues in my career as a journalist, but this was one of the easiest. I think we took less than a minute to decide that there was a public interest in the public hearing the audio of the Prime Minister's reaction to his conversation, and that Labour had asked for that particular use of that particular technology. They were the ones that had left the microphone on. A matter of a few minutes later, we went live on air and played the audio of Gordon Brown calling Gillian Duffy a bigot as he drove away in the car.
So there it was. The Prime Minister had called a voter a bigot, and it was out there being played across major news stations.
We couldn't believe our ears. We could not believe that, somebody is usually so careful and meticulous with, fantastic attention to detail as Gordon Brown would say something so daft and not realise he was being recorded. A bit unfair, but he's wearing a microphone. If you're wearing a microphone, somebody somewhere is listening.
Whilst you might expect a furious response from Labour, they seem to know that the mistake was their own.
I would say that this was one of the occasions where the political team realised that the cock-up, if you want to call it, was theirs, and that they had to own the cock-up. There wasn't a huge amount of pressure on us from them to not use the material, or because they knew that it was never going to happen. They knew they didn't have a leg to stand on. And in actual fact, they were much more concerned about their own damage limitation.
Whilst Gordon Brown and his team may have wanted to bury their heads in the sand, they still had a day of press ahead of them. First stop, the BBC, where Jeremy Vine played the audio back to the Prime Minister, who, unaware of being filmed, put his head in his hands.
Just handed me the tape. Let's play it and see if we can hear it.
Should never have put me with that woman. Whose idea was that?
I don't know, I didn't see her.
It's Sue, I think. It's just ridiculous.
I'm not sure they'll go with that one.
They will go with it.
What did she say?
Oh, everything. She's just a sort of bigoted woman that said she used to be Labour. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
That is what you said. Is she not allowed to express her view to you?
Of course she's allowed to express her view, and I was saying that. The problem was that I was dealing with a question that she raised about immigration, and I wasn't given a chance to answer it because we had a whole melee of press around her. But of course I apologise if I've said anything that is that has been offensive, and I would never put myself in a position where I would want to say anything like that about a woman I met. It was a question about immigration that really, I think, was annoying.
Back in Rochdale, things are starting to spiral out of control. Journalists have tracked down Gillian Duffy. Whilst at first she reflected quite kindly on her interaction with Gordon Brown,
Are you
Very good, yes. Yeah, seems a nice man.
safe to say she isn't best pleased about what he had to say about her.
You might not like this, but he said, "What a disaster. Who got me to talk to that woman? She's a bigot," or words to that effect. And we want to know your response to that.
You're joking.
Because, I mean, how do you feel about that?
Where was I a bigot?
These were his words. So we wondered whether we can talk to you a bit more about it and just find out your reaction.
Labour realised they had some damage limitation to do. Gordon Brown telephoned Gillian Duffy and apologised, but for the public and the media, that didn't seem like enough.
There's no video of it. There isn't any sort of the contrition doesn't seem enough with a telephoned apology. So Gordon Brown drives an hour back to Rochdale to go and meet Gillian Duffy in her house in person with the press outside, all camped outside Gillian Duffy's house.
And so the Prime Minister arrives back in Rochdale and hastily makes his way inside the home of the woman he had called a bigot. Labour sources said that Gordon Brown had actually misheard what Gillian Duffy had said, and we may never know the truth about that. But what is for certain is that he had inadvertently started a media storm. 45 minutes and an accepted apology later, Gordon Brown emerges.
I've just been talking to Gillian. I'm mortified by what's happened. I've given her my sincere apologies. I misunderstood what she said, and she has accepted that there was a misunderstanding, and she's accepted my apology. If you like, I'm a penitent sinner. Sometimes you say things that you don't mean to say, sometimes you say things by mistake, and sometimes when you say things, you want to correct it very quickly. So I wanted to come here and say to Gillian, I was sorry, to say that I'd made a mistake, but to also say I understood the concerns that she was bringing to me, and I had simply misunderstood some of the words that she used.
A moment, I think, in campaigning history that Gordon Brown has never been able to live down, the Labour Party have never been able to live down, and that has to be one of the biggest own goals ever in the history of British election campaigning.
I think it undermined Gordon Brown, irrevocably. I mean, I don't think there was any coming back from it. Yeah, if you wanted an iconic image of the 2010 election, it is Gordon in that radio studio with his head in his hands. That was the image. An astonishing moment, one which, Gordon Brown probably has nightmares about to this day. And, it didn't cost them the election, but because I think they're already going to lose that election, but it certainly cost them seats.
Unbelievably, Gordon Brown's Labour would actually go on to win the seat of Rochdale, but would lose the general election. And this would be the end of the New Labour era. Whilst it's hard to say exactly what the cost of the Bigot-Gate affair was, it certainly didn't help Gordon Brown's case, and became one of the enduring scenes of the campaign.
In the end, I think, from a national perspective, what it did was that it showed that Gordon Brown couldn't really pull off that man of the people, shoulder-rubbing, campaigning, political persona that would have helped him get into number 10 or to stay in number 10.
And that's what really happened on the day the Prime Minister called a voter a bigot.